Chapter 9. An Apparition. Pavel Pavlovitch had made himself exceedingly comfortable. He was sitting in the same chair as the day before, smoking a cigarette, and had just poured himself out the fourth and last glass from a bottle of wine. The teapot and an unfinished glass of tea were standing on a table close by. His flushed face was beaming with bliss. He had even taken off his coat, as it was warm, and was sitting in his waistcoat. "Excuse me, most faithful of friends," he cried, seeing Velchaninoff and jumping up to put on his coat. "I took it off for the greater enjoyment of the moment." Velchaninoff went up to him menacingly. "Are you not quite drunk yet? Is it still possible to talk to you?" Pavel Pavlovitch was a little flustered. "No, not quite. I've been commemorating the deceased, but not quite." "Will you understand me too?" "That's what I've come for, to understand you." "Well then, I begin by telling you straight out that you are a worthless scoundrel," cried Velchaninoff. "If you begin like that, how will you end?" Pavel Pavlovitch protested, evidently cowed, but Velchaninoff went on shouting without heeding him. "Your daughter is dying. She is ill. Have you abandoned her or not?" "Can she really be dying?" "She is ill, exceedingly dangerously ill." "Possibly some little fit." "Don't talk nonsense. She is exceedingly dangerously ill. You ought to have gone, if only to express my gratitude for their hospitality. I quite understand that. Alexey Ivanovitch, my precious, perfect friend." He suddenly clutched Velchaninoff's hand in both of his, and with drunken sentimentality, almost with tears, as though imploring forgiveness, he kept crying out, "Alexey Ivanovitch, don't shout, don't shout! Whether I die or fall drunk into the Neva, what does it matter in the real significance of things? We have plenty of time to go to Mr. Pogoryeltsev." Velchaninoff pulled himself together and restrained himself a little. "You're drunk, and so I don't understand the sense of what you are saying," he observed sternly. "I am always ready to have things out with you. Shall be glad to, in fact, as soon as possible. I've come indeed. But first of all I warn you that I shall take steps. You must stay the night here. Tomorrow morning I'll take you and we'll go together." "I won't let you go," he yelled again. "I'll tie you up and carry you there in my arms." "Would you like this sofa?" he said breathlessly, pointing to a wide, soft sofa which stood opposite the one against the other wall, where he used to sleep himself. "By all means, I can sleep anywhere." "Not anywhere, but on that sofa. Here, take your sheets, your quilt, your pillow." All these Velchaninoff took out of the cupboard and hurriedly flung them to Pavel Pavlovitch, who held out his arms submissively. "Make the bed at once. Make it at once." Pavel Pavlovitch, loaded with his burden, stood in the middle of the room as though hesitating, with a broad drunken grin on his drunken face. But at a second menacing shout from Velchaninoff he suddenly began bustling about at full speed. He pushed back the table and began, sighing and groaning, to unfold the sheets and make the bed. Velchaninoff went to assist him. He was, to some extent, appeased by the alarm and submissiveness of his visitor. "Finish your glass and go to bed," he ordered him again. He felt as though he could not help giving orders. "You sent for that wine yourself, didn't you?" "Yes, I knew you wouldn't send for any more, Alexey Ivanovitch." "It was well you knew it, and there is something more you must know, too. I tell you once more I've taken measures. I won't put up with any more of your antics. I won't put up with your drunken kisses as I did yesterday." "I understand myself, Alexey Ivanovitch, that was only possible once," sniggered Pavel Pavlovitch. Hearing his answer, Velchaninoff, who had been striding up and down the room, stopped almost solemnly before Pavel Pavlovitch. "Pavel Pavlovitch, tell me frankly. You're a sensible man, I've recognized that again. But I assure you, you are on the wrong tack. Speak straightforwardly, act straightforwardly, and I give you my word of honor, I will answer any question you like." Pavel Pavlovitch grinned his broad grin again, which was enough in itself to drive Velchaninoff to fury. "Stop!" Velchaninoff shouted again. "Don't sham! I see through you. I repeat, I give you my word of honor that I am ready to answer anything, and you shall receive every satisfaction possible. That is every sort, even the impossible. Oh, how I wish you could understand me." "Since you are so good," Pavel Pavlovitch moved cautiously towards him, "I was much interested in what you said last night about a predatory type." Velchaninoff, with a curse, fell to pacing about the room more rapidly than ever. "No, Alexey Ivanovitch, don't curse, because I'm so much interested, and have come on purpose to make sure. I'm not very ready with my tongue, but you must forgive me. You know of that predatory type, and of that peaceable type I read in a magazine in the literary criticism. I remembered it this morning, only I had forgotten it, and to tell the truth, I did not understand it at the time. But this is what I wanted to explain. The deceased, Stepan Mikhailovich Bagautov, was he predatory or peaceable? How do you classify him?" Velchaninoff still remained silent, and did not cease his pacing up and down. "The predatory type," he began, stopping suddenly in exasperation, "is the man who would sooner have put poison in Bagautov's glass when drinking champagne with him in honor of their delightful meeting, as you drank with me yesterday, than have followed his coffin to the cemetery as you have today, the devil only knows from what secret, underground, loathsome impulse and distorted feeling that only degrades you. Yes, degrades you." "It's true that I shouldn't have gone," Pavel Pavlovitch assented, "but you do pitch into me." "It's not the man," Velchaninoff, getting hotter, went on shouting, without heeding him. "It's not the man who poses to himself as goodness knows what, who reckons up his score of right and wrong, goes over and over his grievance as though it were a lesson, frets, goes in for all sorts of antics and apishness, hangs on people's necks, and most likely he has been spending all his time at it too. Is it true that you tried to hang yourself? Is it?" When I was drunk, I did talk wildly. I don't remember. It isn't quite seemly, Alexey Ivanovitch, to put poison in wine. Apart from the fact that I am a civil servant of good repute, you know I have money of my own, and what's more, I may want to get married again. Besides, you'll be sent to the gallows. To be sure, that unpleasantness also, though nowadays they admit many extenuating circumstances in the law courts. I'll tell you a killing little anecdote, Alexey Ivanovitch. I thought of it this morning in the carriage. I wanted to tell you of it then. You said just now, hangs on people's necks. You remember perhaps Semyon Petrovich Livsov? He used to come and see us when you were in tea. Well, his younger brother, who was also a young Petersburg swell, was in attendance on the governor at V, and he too was distinguished for various qualities. He had a quarrel with Golubenko, a colonel, in the presence of ladies and the lady of his heart, and considered himself insulted, but he swallowed the affront and concealed it. And meanwhile Golubenko caught him out with the lady of his heart and made her an offer. And what do you think? This Livsov formed a genuine friendship with Golubenko. He quite made it up with him, and what's more, insisted on being his best man. He held the wedding crown, and when they came from under the wedding crown, he went up to kiss and congratulate Golubenko. And in the presence of the governor and all the honourable company, with his swallow-tail coat and his hair in curl, he sticks the bridegroom in the stomach with a knife, so that he rolled over. His own best man! What a disgrace! And what's more, when he'd stabbed him like that, he rushed about crying, "No, what have I done? Oh, what is it I've done?" with floods of tears, trembling all over, flinging himself on people's necks, even ladies. "Ah, what have I done?" he kept saying. "What have I done now?" He was killing. Though one feels sorry for Golubenko, perhaps, but after all he recovered. "I don't see why you told me the story," observed Velchaninoff, frowning sternly. "Why, all because he stuck the knife in him, you know," Pavel Pavlovitch tittered. "You can see he was not the type, but a snivelling fellow, since he forgot all good manners in his horror, and flung himself on the ladies' necks in the presence of the governor. But you see he stabbed him. He got his own back. That was all I meant." "Go to hell!" Velchaninoff yelled suddenly, in a voice not his own, as though something had exploded in him. "Go to hell with your underground vileness! You are nothing but underground vileness! You thought you'd scare me, you base man, torturing a child! You scoundrel! You scoundrel! You scoundrel!" he shouted, beside himself, gasping for breath at every word. A complete revulsion came over Pavel Pavlovitch, which actually seemed to sober him. His lips quivered. "Is it you, Alexey Ivanovitch, call me a scoundrel? You call me?" But Velchaninoff had already realized what he had done. "I am ready to apologize," he answered after a pause of gloomy hesitation. "But only if you will act straightforwardly at once yourself." "In your place I would apologize without any ifs, Alexey Ivanovitch." "Very good, so be it." said Velchaninoff, after another slight pause. "I apologize to you. But you'll admit yourself, Pavel Pavlovitch, that after all this, I need not consider that I owe you anything. I'm speaking with reference to the whole matter, and not only to the present incident." "That's all right. Why consider?" Pavel Pavlovitch sniggered, though he kept his eyes on the ground. "So much the better, then. So much the better. Finish your wine and go to bed, for I won't let you go anyway." "Oh, the wine." Pavel Pavlovitch seemed, as it were, a little disconcerted. He went to the table, however, and finished the last glass of wine he had poured out so long before. Perhaps he had drunk a great deal before, for his hand trembled, and he spilt part of the wine on the floor and on his shirt and waistcoat. He finished it all, however, as though he could not bear to leave a drop, and respectfully replacing the empty glass on the table, he went submissively to his bed to undress. "But wouldn't it be better for me not to stay the night?" he brought out for some reason, though he had taken off one boot and was holding it in his hand. "No, it wouldn't," Velchaninoff answered wrathfully, still pacing up and down the room without looking at him. Pavel Pavlovitch undressed and got into bed. A quarter of an hour later, Velchaninoff went to bed too, and put out the candle. He fell asleep uneasily. The new element that had turned up unexpectedly and complicated the whole business more than ever worried him now, and at the same time he felt that he was for some reason ashamed of his uneasiness. He was just dozing off, but he was waked up all at once by a rustling sound. He looked round at once towards Pavel Pavlovitch's bed. The room was dark, the curtains were drawn, but Velchaninoff fancied that Pavel Pavlovitch was not lying down, but was sitting on the bed. "What's the matter?" Velchaninoff called to him. "A ghost," Pavel Pavlovitch said, scarcely audibly, after a brief pause. "What do you mean? What sort of ghost?" "There, in that room. I seem to see a ghost in the doorway." "Whose ghost?" Velchaninoff asked again after a pause. "Natalia Vasilievna's." Velchaninoff stood up on the rug and looked across the passage into the other room, the door of which always stood open. There were only blinds instead of curtains on the window, and so it was much lighter there. "There's nothing in that room, and you are drunk. Go to bed," said Velchaninoff. He got into bed and wrapped himself in the quilt. Pavel Pavlovitch got into bed too without uttering a word. "And have you ever seen ghosts before?" Velchaninoff asked suddenly, 10 minutes afterwards. Pavel Pavlovitch too was silent for a while. "I thought I saw one once," he responded faintly. Silence followed again. Velchaninoff could not have said for certain whether he had been asleep or not, but about an hour had passed, when he suddenly turned round again. Whether he was roused again by a rustle, he was not sure, but felt as though in the pitch dark something white was standing over him, not quite close, but in the middle of the room. He sat up in bed, and for a full minute gazed into the darkness. "Is that you, Pavel Pavlovitch?" he said in a failing voice. His own voice, ringing out suddenly in the stillness and the dark, seemed to him somehow strange. No answer followed, but there could be no doubt that someone was standing there. "Is that you, Pavel Pavlovitch?" he repeated, more loudly, so loudly, in fact, that if Pavel Pavlovitch had been quietly asleep in his bed, he would certainly have waked up and answered. But again, no answer came. Yet he fancied that the white, hardly distinguishable figure moved nearer to him. Then something strange followed. Something seemed to explode within him, exactly as it had that evening, and he shouted at the top of his voice, in a most hideous, frantic voice, gasping for breath at each word, "If you, drunken fool, dare to imagine that you can frighten me, I'll turn over to the wall. I'll put the bedclothes over my head, then won't turn round again all night, to show you how much I care. If you were to stand there till morning, like a fool, and I spit upon you." And he spat furiously in the direction, as he supposed, of Pavel Pavlovitch, turned over to the wall, drew the bedclothes over his head as he had said, and grew numb in that position, not stirring a muscle. A death-like silence followed. Whether the phantom was moving nearer or standing still, he could not tell, but his heart was beating violently. Fully 5 minutes passed, and suddenly, 2 steps from him, he heard the meek and plaintive voice of Pavel Pavlovitch. "I got up, Alexey Ivanovitch, to look for the—" And he mentioned a quite indispensable domestic article. "I didn't find one there. I meant to look quietly under your bed." "Why didn't you speak when I shouted?" Velchaninoff asked in a breaking voice, after an interval of half a minute. "I was frightened. You shouted so. I was frightened." "There, in the corner on the left, in the little cupboard. Light the candle." "I can do without the candle," Pavel Pavlovitch brought out meekly, making for the corner. "Forgive me, Alexey Ivanovitch, for disturbing you so. I was so bewildered." But Velchaninoff made no reply. He still lay with his face to the wall, and lay so all night, without once turning over. Whether it was that he wanted to do as he had said, and so show his contempt, he did not know himself what he was feeling. His nervous irritability passed at last almost into delirium, and it was a long time before he went to sleep. Waking next morning between 9 and 10, he jumped up and sat up in bed, as though someone had given him a shove. But Pavel Pavlovitch was not in the room. The unmade bed stood there empty. He had crept away at dawn. "I knew it would be so!" cried Velchaninoff, slapping himself on the forehead. Breaking in. So the critical fact is now out in the open. While others might disagree, I am inclined to take Pavel Pavlovitch at his word when he says that he thought he saw the ghost of his deceased wife in the other room. And when he says an hour later that he was simply looking for a so-called quite indispensable domestic article, that is, the chamber pot. The man, after all, had just drunk 4 glasses of wine. The more interesting feature of this nighttime sequence concerns the effect on Velchaninov's consciousness. While this chapter's evening conversation mirrors the insinuations and hints of the interaction of the night before in Chapter 7, the nocturnal terrors of Velchaninov have their antecedent in Chapter 2, which takes place 2 nights prior. This is now the second time that some ethereal creature has haunted the apartment. The first was a collection of accusers in his dream, and it's the second time that Pavel Pavlovitch in the flesh has sent both Velchaninov's imagination and his heart racing. I have already referred to the literary context of the terms predatory and peaceable in previous comments, but there is another literary reference in this chapter. Those who are familiar with Dostoevsky's broader oeuvre will have noted Velchaninov's application of the term underground in reference to his visitor. There is indeed a thematic parallel between Pavel Pavlovitch and the underground man, to which I may return in my closing remarks. End of comments.